No Miki Show. We clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from a leech, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.
Hello and welcome to the No Miki Show. It is Wednesday, January 26th. It's Aquarius season if you're into that. So I really has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. Just thought I'd throw that out there. We've been talking a lot about how the right wing has been organizing. And, I'm old enough to remember seeing how the right wing pivoted from the culture wars that existed during the Reagan era and even during the 90s into different types of culture wars during the 2000s. Of course, there was a big war to rally around. Of course, George W. Bush and Jeb Bush and the Bush family wanted to make sure that the neocons of their party maintained control away from people like Pat Buchanan, who was pushing out a different type of culture war. We're in a time now where it seems as if all of those wars, absolute, like real wars and culture wars, are unifying the Republican Party. But where are we going in the future? And maybe, are we there now? One of the most interesting things I find about reading history during times of note is, especially if there's, geopolitical stakes. When you look at the war, you look at when the economy fell in 1929, for instance, as Richard Wolff said yesterday on our show, Professor Richard Wolff said, there were hints that the working class was already angry before the economy fell because of the conditions across the country. And he said a lot of the organizing was starting, a decade earlier. And so, when you look back at history and you read firsthand accounts of crazy moments, whether it's the rise of fascists or the Nazi Party or the lead up to World War II, there have been a lot of accounts of folks recognizing that it was about to get very dark, but also recognizing that leadership and people in power were not recognizing it. And I think it's important because, we are attached and tethered to these machines, to our phones, to our computers, to streaming, to games. Everything is sort of gamified in today's world. Even politics is gamified. We live on quarterly financial business models, but also political quarters. The news cycle is a 24-second news cycle. We are addicted to just keeping the information and data flowing. And sometimes what that does is it disconnects where we really are, even though I think intellectually a lot of us understand where we are because we're in the middle of these fights, but really where we are on the ground, materially. And I feel like that's starting to change with working people. Working people are understanding that you can't distract us away from the fact that we don't have rent control or we don't have an eviction moratorium or we're not going to get rent relief. Working people can't be distracted away from the fact that their wages have not increased in several decades as inflation, which is artificially induced by employers in many cases. You can't distract away from that with a crazy news cycle. In this movement, especially since Donald Trump was elected, we have been fighting these little battles, whether it's the Women's March or fighting the Muslim ban or the George Floyd protests. We've organized massive movements and micro movements, and we've worked together. We've been on presidential campaigns, congressional campaigns. We've seen wins and losses, but it's been a lot of fighting, a lot of organizing, a lot of educating, keeping us mobilized against an enemy here, an enemy there, an enemy over there. Of course, now you're seeing, and this is wonderful, workers on the ground across this country organizing unions, quitting, striking. You're seeing them withhold their labor, their power, so that their material benefits, their material conditions improve. And that is wonderful. But while this is going on, I think what we're witnessing is something really bizarre. on the right. It's not just about culture wars anymore, although they're still throwing those out there. It's not just about wars anymore, although they're, of course, beating the war drum. There's this other technological aspect of the right wing right now. There's the right wing has found a way to grow its movement because they're always facing demographic shifts. We have a much more diverse country and a much more progressive country. The majority of Americans want climate change, the Green New Deal. They support climate change initiatives. They support Medicare for all. On the progressive issues, majority of Americans across the political spectrum support these policies. So they know that they're not going to win on policy, and they know that this country is becoming more diverse. So they've had to do everything to take over the map of the country, take over the courts. They've invested in every single corner of this country, but they're not holding back on media. We know that they dominate Fox News. We know that they've got their right-wing publications like Breitbart and Newsmax and OAN. But it's still not enough. They still have to keep, as their party dies off, they need to keep people coming in. And this is where it gets bizarre. It's not just that you have some podcast hosts like Joe Rogan, who we'll talk about later on in the show, who have eased into this right-wing populism by dancing with people like Jordan Peterson and Alex Jones. He supposedly claimed he was supporting Bernie Sanders. And I think that when Bernie was running, it was a good idea to broaden the coalition to try to bring people in. My personal concern, is that Joe Rogan was always using that as an opportunity to bring people into his audience and his political experience. That's Joe Rogan. But then you've got folks, one person who he admires greatly is Elon Musk. Of course, Elon Musk doesn't care for labor. He doesn't care for socialists. He's very open about that. He has definitely a supremacist mindset. He wants to explore space at the cost of supporting his own workers and treating them fairly. Space exploration is the most important issue that he thinks, we need to face right now, rather than the conditions on the ground in this country, and of course, climate change. But he's also investing in neurotechnology. He's obsessed with separating the human from the human, keeping us on this path of being addicted to technology and the next thing, and not rooted in the ground. He's so against materialism, I guess, that he has sold all of his houses around the world. It's like he wants us all to be robots. I'm not really sure what their agenda is, but I think this is something that we have to pay attention to a little bit more closely. Steve Bannon, who we talk a lot about on the show, he's rooted in traditionalism. And if you don't know what traditionalism, we're going to cover it in the future, but go check it out. Go Google it if you have a chance. But it is a white supremacist aspect. It's something that he has not shied away from, but he's been very cautious about how he articulates his belief in traditionalism as a traditionalist. And this overlaps with a lot of the right-wingers around the world who are organizing locally and nationally on a populist message. So how does populism intersect with Elon Musk? Doesn't make any sense. He's not for socialists. He doesn't care about workers, but somehow they're all overlapping. And that is why the technology is so important. Just as today, the warmongers are unified with the evangelicals and the low-tax Koch brother types, or no-tax Koch brother types in the Republican Party, there's this other unification of different folks on the right colliding because they know that they need to pull from each other so that they have the future, so that they can essentially recruit, brainwash, and build a pipeline of mostly young white men. Doesn't hurt for them to have a few people of color and women, of course. That helps with their cause, and that's nothing new to the Republican Party. But the goal is to keep young white men angry, and just enough young Latino men angry, and just enough young Black men angry, so that they keep winning power. That is why it's so important to have government oversight of these tech companies, because we know very well that they do much better online than we do. Part of that is by design, and part of that is their ability to understand these spaces in a much deeper way. We have a fascinating show today. It is Solidarity Wednesday. As you know, we have Ben Dixon on as our second interview today. But first up, we have Dulcie Everitt, who is the author of BrexLit, The Problems of Englishness in Pre- and Post-Brexit Referendum Literature. Super interesting and relatable. I think this relates to what we were talking about this morning. And then later on, we have Marcus from Left Flank Vets to talk about Ukraine. We'll be right back after this quick little break. Welcome back. All right, we have 2 days to get as many working women as possible who are thinking about running for office, are running for office, to go sign up for the free all day. It is a real training, campaign training that Matriarch is putting on. It's digital. They're incredible speakers, wonderful speakers. We have Cynthia Nixon, who's going to be headlining, talking about how she is a working she's a working actor and she's a union member. And I think a lot of people forget that. But of course, she had this labor background, had a very working class story growing up, and then, of course, challenged Governor Cuomo for governor a couple of years ago. So she's going to be headlining. We have Representative Park Cannon, who notably got arrested at the Georgia State Capitol when she was protesting voting rights, and the police, remember when they arrested her? It was ridiculous. She's going to be keynoting. Mayor Carmen Julian Cruz from San Juan, Puerto Rico, who, of course, challenged very effectively Donald Trump as the island was underwater. And then she became co-chair of Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign. Those are just three keynotes. We have the former speaker of the New York City Council, Melissa Mark Viverito, who's going to be speaking. We have plenty of organizers, folks who work in this space, who are committed to helping working women get elected, a diverse, intersectional, all-inclusive group of women who want to support other women who, of course, the establishment does not roll out the red carpet for. It is not easy to run for office when you're working class. You don't have usually access to wealthy people, and that is hard because you have to raise a little bit of money to run. Do you have to raise millions and millions? No, but you have to raise a little bit to be able to be a viable candidate. We're gonna, at this training, you're gonna learn how to run for office. It's the basics, and then, if you're doing it, we have several other smaller trainings that we do to delve in a little bit deeper. It's a great sisterhood. It's a wonderful coalition. There's only 2 days left to sign up. Go to matriarchtraining.com. I promise it's worth it. Cori Bush's campaign manager is going to be giving a speech. We're going to be talking about how women get attacked in very unique ways and how you fight back. What is the playbook that they use against women when they run, especially if they're progressive? Just a little bit of what we're going to be touching on. Sign up at matriarchtraining.com. Again, it's all day on Saturday, 9 a.m. Eastern to 6 p.m. You don't want to miss it. Our first guest is Dulcie Everitt. She is the author of BrexLit, The Problems of Englishness in Pre- and Post-Brexit Referendum Literature. This is fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I guess I just have to start off with, how did you recognize that there was something happening here in post-Brexit UK?
Yeah, so obviously I am English, and this was the first sort of political moment that I felt really engaged with. I was 18 at the time of the referendum, and it was a watershed moment in more than one way. But for me, it was a really it was a real turning point for my engagement with politics and my recognition of sort of the polarization that has been simmering for quite some time. Right after the referendum happened, there were a few texts already coming out in very, very quick succession. So the first one that I think of when, in my own experience, seeing it published was Ali Smith's Autumn. When it was published, I was sort of amazed at how quickly it had been turned around. It was a matter of months, and I picked it up straight away, and I felt it really captured the political moment. So it was in the back of my mind for a while, and I became quite interested in this as a literary movement. And by the time I was a senior in college, I went to Connecticut College, and I studied English. It came time to work out a thesis topic, and I kind of thought back to that experience and was researching whether this was kind of a viable topic. And it turns out that BrexLit, which was a term coined by the Financial Times, was really in motion. So I really wanted to dedicate some time to understanding what the cultural literary response to Brexit had been. So my book is about that. It's about the cultural, emotional reaction, and that's sort of how I came across it and how I became interested in it.
Before we get into what types of themes are occurring in this literature, can we just remind folks, our audience is primarily in the US,
Right.
what was Brexit, who was behind it, and really where it stands right now?
Absolutely. So Brexit is the term that's used for the UK's exit from the European Union. So essentially, it was a debate between two sides in the UK, the Leave side and the Remain side. In 2015, David Cameron announced that there would be a referendum. So the people would be deciding whether we stayed in the EU or whether we left. And that was going to take place in 2016 in June. And the debate trail kind of followed that. And the Remain side was spearheaded by Cameron and his government. And then, although you had a lot of Eurosceptics in his government as well, in his party. But the Leave side was spearheaded by our now Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, who was the leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party, otherwise known as UKIP.
And Boris Johnson is from the Tory party, so these are conservatives, just to put it in perspective.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about Bannon just at the top, but Steve Bannon was very close with Farage and meeting with him on Brexit strategy. Do folks realize this now? I mean, of course, it wasn't just conservatives who voted for Brexit. Is there sort of an understanding of, well, maybe we shouldn't have done this, or are people still firmly supporting Brexit at the same numbers?
So obviously it was very close referendum. So the Leave vote won by 51%, and the Remain vote lost. It was 49%. So it was extremely close. Yeah. And apparently, I read the other day in a poll, 9 and 10 people would vote the same way again.
Wow.
Right. So there's still very staunch beliefs about Brexit. I think the pandemic has kind of cast over a lot of this happening because we've been focused elsewhere. But I do think there is still strong feelings about it. Coming from my own perspective, I think these things are always biased who you're surrounded by and who you speak to and things like that. So I think there's, from my perspective, a bit more of kind of settling into the reality of the situation, which is that we have left the EU and this is what's happening. There's no argument for going back. I don't think it'd be appropriate to suggest that we should go back and sort of do a do-over or something like that. But I think people are kind of coming to terms with it still. And as you sort of mentioned before, the implications of Brexit are still being played out. We're not really sure where we're going to be in 10 years post-referendum, but policies are still kind of slowly developing.
And of course, when you have post-Brexit literature, that is part of the propaganda to keep people engaged and committed to Brexit.
So post-Brexit literature is really actually more from a Remain perspective.
Okay.
So pre and post-Brexit referendum literature both problematize Englishness as an identity for several reasons, but predominantly because it's a proto-nationalism It doesn't reflect the actual nation that we're a part of. So we are the UK, we're the United Kingdom, Britain, and that is made up of 4 nations: Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. So saying Englishness or Scottish nationalism, Irish nationalism, Welsh nationalism, it doesn't reflect the nation state.
Right.
So in that way, they're sub-nationalisms, and they're kind of tricky in that regard. But English nationalism is also unique because it's just so difficult to define, even as a sub-nationalism. Part of the problem with it is that if you asked people on the street, I think they'd have a really hard time telling you. I always thought about it as something that was kind of a series of stereotypes, stiff upper lip, or keep calm, carry on, things like that. And I do think there's an element of those things kind of unite English people, but it's a very tricky identity that they both, so pre and post Brexit, authors are kind of grappling with what is Englishness, what does it look like, what does it mean politically, emotionally, and post Brexit referendum literature is sort of seeking to understand the implications. So some of the texts that I look at leave room for hope. So they kind of acknowledge that there are problems, and they acknowledge that a lot of what followed the referendum was vitriolic. It was very divisive. But they kind of allow for a little bit of rejuvenation. So the example I gave earlier of Ali Smith's Autumn, she uses time as a really unique force to kind of show how things just recycle. So Autumn is part of a seasonal quartet. There's 4 books. They follow the seasons, and it's kind of a theme within the novel that things decay. They grow and then they decay. So things are built and they fall down, or we join the EU, we leave the EU. She kind of sees it almost indifferently as just part of the natural cycle. Whereas some other post-Brexit texts are very dystopian. They're very harsh and unforgiving. So the dystopian novel that I looked at was Perfidious Albion by Sam Byers. And it is set in a small town, and people are used as sort of experiment. An experiment is played on the citizens of this town from a data company. It's very sort of Cambridge Analytica, relating to all of that kind of thing. And that ends literally by saying error 404, page cannot be found. So it's almost saying there is no future, left the EU, that's it. It's kind of all over. And The Cockroach by Ian McEwan similarly is very harsh. It's a novella, and it's a take on Kafka's Metamorphosis. And it envisages the government cabinet as having been infiltrated by cockroaches who have literally morphed into the government. So it's very unforgiving.
That seems more realistic to me than any of them.
It did to many people. One of the criticisms, obviously, of that book is that there's no nuance whatsoever. It's very, very in his perspective. But like I said, it was such a divisive topic that it did initiate some really strong feelings. And it is interesting that post-Brexit referendum literature is written from a Remain perspective. It's something that I'm still trying to kind of work out. I think part of it is that it was more of a shock, I suppose. And it felt like there was something that needed to be dealt with that on the Leave side perhaps wasn't. It was sort of obvious, or although I think it was a bit of a shock to everyone from my perspective.
On the left, I mean, you mentioned that there are these many identities. Britishness, Englishness is it's complicated. But I was in Scotland a few months ago, and I met with some people that were in the Scottish independence movement, and I thought to myself, I'm really curious why. I'm sure there has been organizing, but why the organizing of breaking up the UK was not an alternative, or at least got to the level of international awareness, as opposed to Brexit. Is that as popular? Are people engaged with it as much? Is there sort of an alternative movement to do so?
Yeah, I mean, Scottish nationalism is something that has been quite focused on independence. You look at Nicola
Mm-hmm.
Sturgeon, still pretty focused on another independence referendum. There have been referenda on that, and the most recent voted to remain in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be, I haven't noticed it as a really viable alternative to Brexit itself, although post-Brexit it revived that notion for Nicola Sturgeon, if we leave, we can rejoin the EU. But I think by virtue of being on an island ourselves, it would be perhaps quite difficult. People enjoy being able to just go to Scotland, come to England,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling part of the island, I think. So I wouldn't say necessarily that it was an alternative to Brexit, but I do think that Brexit has perhaps given nationalist movements a bit of a nudge towards bringing that back to the fore. And it's important to note as well that there is devolved government within the UK. So there is a Scottish Parliament and a Welsh and a Northern Irish Parliament. So you do have some separation from Westminster, but it is still very Anglo-centric.
Mm-hmm. How much of this post-Brexit literature from the Remain side ties in with really what's happening with EU in general? I mean, we're talking today as Russia is flexing its muscles against Ukraine, and of course, many members of the EU are very concerned about this. Not all of them. There are absolutely links between Putin folks, I'll say, and pushing for Brexit, because of course it would, and probably in his perspective, it weakened the EU, which is big opposition to him. So is that, where do people feel right now? I mean, in general, is there any sort of public opinion on how Russia's flexing its muscles against the EU and how the UK is not being part of this conversation plays into, some escalation?
Sure. I can't say I'm an expert on this area, just to be
Mm-hmm.
clear, but I think that Brexit, it was leaving the EU from a bureaucratic perspective. And I think from even on the Leave side, there was a kind of acknowledgement that you're still going to have to engage with Europe in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think at a moment like this, it is a mutual interest to stop what's happening. But I'm not aware of a kind of big link that's being spoken about necessarily.
How far into Brexit are you right now? Is it completely disentangled, or?
No, I mean, there's still negotiations ongoing. It's kind of difficult to keep up with it all, frankly. I mean, it's been 6 years since the referendum, and we left the EU in December 2020, so it's hasn't even been 2 years yet. So I think it is still all ongoing. There are still things to work out, and that is, like I said, something that's kind of being, or has been potentially kicked down the road a little bit due to the pandemic.
Do you think that this post-Brexit literature is working? I mean, if there's an agenda, do you think it's working?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's an agenda necessarily. So I think my perspective on post-Brexit referendum literature is that it's almost serving as a time capsule now. Mm-hmm. It was published so quickly. So all of the texts, I define BrexLit in my book as the texts that were published from the referendum, so June 2016 until we left in December 2020. So in that short period, books were published, with such speed, and I think the agenda is to capture the moment, the emotional, immediate moment. I'm not convinced that it will serve as a way for kind of changing minds necessarily, though I hope that it will promote dialogue. And I think one of the things that I really would like people to know about the book is that it doesn't come from, obviously I have political biases, we all do, and when we write, those come through, and like I say, all of the texts are really from a Remain perspective, so it's difficult not to do that. But I'm not coming from a position of this is the right way to think, or this is the only way, or I don't think it's intended to lecture. I think it's supposed to be about facilitating discussions and understanding what the political mood was, how people were speaking about Brexit. So a lot of as you said about themes earlier, I suppose I'll say some of them now. So obviously with the Leave campaign, a little bit like what we saw with Donald Trump's campaign, you were tapping into nostalgia, you were tapping into sort of xenophobia and isolationism. That's not to say that everyone who voted for Leave or for Trump is necessarily, 100% invested in that rhetoric, but that's absolutely what was sort of put forth. So I think that it's really a way of capturing the reaction, the immediate feeling, and serving as, say, a time capsule for future. I think in 50 years, you're going to be able to look at this and really get a sense of what it was to be in the country when the referendum happened. I mean, personally, I remember the day very vividly. I'm sure that you would remember the day that Trump was elected very vividly. Most people will. These are very key moments. And I remember the feeling in London was low. You could feel it. And I actually moved to the US in 2016, right before Trump was elected, and it was the same feeling on my university campus. And like I say, people have different reactions to these things, but from my experience and from reading these books, my interpretation is that they're just really tapping into what people feel, what from this political perspective, how it felt.
Well said. I mean, that's ultimately what every movement is about, is they're trying to tap into what people are feeling if they're obviously effective. Really interesting take. I'm fascinated by this, and it's a unique kind of observation that you've been able to pick up, and hopefully one that folks are going to become more conscious of as we see this type of literature. I'm sure it's happening. We had it here too with the resistance crowd. That's what we call them.
Yeah, it's definitely ongoing as well. I should say that this isn't a comprehensive book by any stretch of the imagination. BrexLit texts are still going to be published. And I think you could classify any book now that comes out that really focuses on the implications of the referendum as BrexLit. So that's important to know as well.
You can be a BrexLit analyst now.
Yeah, future career. There we go.
Dulcie Everitt, thank you so much for joining us. You can check out Dulcie's book, BrexLit, The Problems of Englishness in Pre- and Post-Brexit and Referendum Literature, published by our friends at Zero Books. Just such a pleasure, and please keep us updated on everything.
Thank you so much for having me.
We will be back with the one and only Ben Dixon for Solidarity Wednesdays. Welcome back to TNS, the Nomi Q Show. If you don't already know, we do a special show on Tuesdays called TNS Live, where we have extensive interviews Tuesday nights at 8 p.m., starting off on YouTube and Rockfin. And then we move over to Rockfin, where pretty much for an hour, we talk with some of the greatest minds in the world in these times, who always help us understand things like the economy and inflation, the jobs crisis, and BBB and politics and Roosevelt. And I'm just listing off a few things here and there, and climate. These are all issues that we have discussed in the last few months of doing this. So you have to check us out, TNS Live. It is on this channel and on Rockfin at 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. And we just had Professor Richard Wolff. You can go back and check that out. I mention this because our patrons have been a very big part of our ability to grow, to develop partnerships. They've been the lifeblood during this pandemic. We launched the show right before the pandemic, and thanks to our patrons, we have been able to keep going and have a team and get great guests and graphics, all these things. Like, I can't do any of that. I can't see, this is David. David does this, but this is because we have patrons. So if you're not already a patron and you're able to be one, join us at patreon.com/thenomikey show. They're all different levels. We also have some swag in there, some stickers and mugs, and I think we still have the bags up there too, I believe. And then maybe, in the near future, we'll do live events again soon. It's been a while. Last time we did one, the only time we did one, was on Super Tuesday, and then the pandemic hit. So we'd love to do one again, and hopefully we'll be celebrating more than crying, because by the end of that night, even though it was a great lineup, it was a sad night. But definitely join us on Patreon. And if you were a patron, you can't afford to be one, or you needed to drop a level, or you have any questions, you need to take a break for a few months, email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We'll figure it out. We can also sponsor another patron. That's something that folks have done in the past. It makes a huge difference. It's how we keep these things going. Some of these shows, they have lists that they've acquired from other shows and other well-known figures. And they come in with like, $20,000, $30,000 a month. We're not like that. We had to do this organically. We are independent, truly independent. No one gave us a list. It was really just through this progressive, independent word of mouth. So if you can, show us some love, and keep in mind, there are not a lot of women in the indie media. So you're supporting a women-run show, and support other women too, like Francesca Fiorentini. There's one that we love. Anna Kasparian over at Jacobin, and of course on TYT. There are lots of women in this space, many more. We're probably going to have more on rotating and say, like, support their work too, because there is a crisis at the algorithm. So if you are able to support women-hosted shows, please do. All right, we will be right back with Solidarity Wednesdays. Hello, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. It is Solidarity Wednesday, and we have the one and only co-host of Solidarity Wednesday. I'm just going to say that. I think that's what we're going to say. Benjamin Dixon. He's, of course, the host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Oh, you've got a sweatshirt on now. Look at that.
Yeah, I had a swap. I was outside doing some work with the kids, and I realized I have to have some solidarity. So I said, let me grab my closest hoodie. And thank you so much. It's always good to be here. And thank you for being with us on the morning show this morning.
Oh, it was wonderful. As I said, if you haven't checked out Ben's show, I love that it's in the morning, because we said this last week. I felt like my intention was set for the day. There was a real difference in what I was thinking about, how I was reading things, how I was engaging with things, online. I think, we're in this fight, and there's so much fighting going on. Having that energy, energy's finite. So where are we going to steer our energy? And I think you're doing it with such intent. You're really giving people purpose and perspective. So, your energy is going in the right directions, not
Thank you.
everywhere.
I appreciate that. That means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, I look at energy on this note as a weapon. It can be a weapon, a good weapon and a bad weapon, right? If you movement energy in particular, you could use it to defend yourself, to go after actual enemy, but you wouldn't go shooting a gun around all over the place every time somebody pissed you off, right?
That's right. It's balance. It is having the ability to address problems at the level that they should be addressed. So we're not going to pull the guns out every single time.
I hope not.
Yeah.
So with that, I will say, both you and I have been talking about this guy for a while, and we got some pushback from allies who have now come over to our side. Some allies who've come over to our side, recognizing, this isn't just your everyday comedian podcaster, because that's my favorite. They always say, oh, he's just a comedian. Oh, come on. Yeah, you have a comedian, running the show in Eastern Europe right now that is now a leader in Eastern Europe.
That's right.
So I'm talking about Joe Rogan, of course. Joe Rogan has this extraordinary Spotify deal. We talked about this on your show this morning. He made $150 million on Spotify for the last 2 years. You and I have been talking about how Spotify really should not be rewarding somebody who
That's right.
is so reckless with how he talks about issues, and he has no editor. But they always claim cancel culture. So here's another one. He's such a victim of cancel culture. The musician Neil Young. Neil Young has said that he demands Spotify remove his music, Neil Young's music, over false information about vaccines that, of course, Joe Rogan has been spewing. So basically, it's either me or Rogan, and they responded to late last night, Spotify, and removed a couple hundred different episodes of Joe Rogan. Like, that's some sort of compromise. Is it just about the vaccines, or is there something else going on with Rogan? Like, is it Is that enough?
So tech culture is bro culture with very few exceptions. Actually, my corporate career was in with a tech company, a marketing tech company, and it was very much bro culture. That company I vouch for, they're good. Joe Rogan is benefiting from the bro culture of Silicon Valley and the fact that it is not only embedded in society at large, but even in the technology itself. The algorithms lean towards not only fascism, but like that quote unquote bro culture, which allows them to kind of just brush it off and say, oh, he's just a comedian. And that we should just laugh and we should just, it's probably one of the most insidious forms of cover fire is when you just brush somebody off as like a dumb bro.
You know, Howard Stern, I love that he responded to this because when you say dumb bro, it's like, oh, boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
That's right.
Really, boys can be toxic and hurt each other and hurt others and bully women and other folks as well. But Howard Stern, he's imperfect himself, but with that being said, Howard Stern has a ginormous audience. He changed the way this industry works, paving the way for someone like Joe Rogan to have a spot at Spotify. Of course, he basically subsidized SiriusXM for a while. Let's just play his response to this whole debacle.
Then he's not. I don't think he's for censorship. I don't think Neil Young is for censorship. I just think he's saying, look, I don't want to be part of this organization because if my music is helping people bring people to the table and then they're spreading something as lethal as don't take the vaccine, do this.
That makes sense.
I'm against any kind of censorship, really. I really am. I don't like censorship. But when you're talking about life and death, like poor Meatloaf got sucked into some weird fucking cult.
Wow. So they do say this. They say anytime there's pushback against them, you're censoring me.
That's right. That's right. They have this sensation that any inconvenience, the mildest of inconveniences is oppression. And really, I do appreciate the Howard Stern clip. It is good to hear him like unapologetically wading into the side of the conversation for reason. People are dying. We're coming up to 1 million people dead in this country. And we still have Joe Rogan, and actually it escalated. I saw on Fox News, I don't know if you saw this clip with Tucker Carlson last night, where the guy was just basically saying, don't take the vaccine. It's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. I have to be careful what I say because YouTube algorithm will find us, but Spotify can't seem to find Joe Rogan.
That's exactly it. And this is, well after employees at Spotify have voiced outrage and frustration that they're working for a company that enables this. He goes unchecked, while of course others do remain checked or do not receive that type of boost or support. But we talked about that this morning. What this signals to me as, this is a guy who was given an opportunity, because every time you're talent and you get a contract like this, it's a deal and your labor is worth money, but it is also an opportunity because you're given a platform, and for him in particular, $150 million. He's not a journalist. He's barely even a successful comedian. He's a personality who built a podcast very effectively off of relationships with comedians and people he had in that industry. And it took a turn. But now, when there's the slightest bit of pushback, it's you're censoring me, and his friends that he has on, Alex Jones. We're going to play this clip of Jordan Peterson. My sense of this is it's really like a form of supremacy. Like they are not used to people pushing them back, whether it's folks angry that they're spewing misinformation and falsities for whatever group's agenda, or worse, I don't want to take the vaccine because stop telling me what to do.
The most sensitive. I don't mean to cut you off, but as you're talking, I just hear this. The most sensitive people in the world are conservative white men. Mm-hmm. They just can't handle anything. I mean, can you imagine them having to go a day in the life of a woman and having to handle pushback? I just think pushback is a normal course of life that a lot of conservative white men have never had to deal with. So of course they feel like this is oppression.
I'm so glad that you say that, because they also have a lot of opinions about other people who come from marginalized communities. And of course, I'm talking about Jordan Peterson's take on Michael Eric Dyson. I can't even with this. I can't wait to hear your response. Let's play that clip.
Who you ask, either you're a voice of reason and rationality and personal responsibility, or you're a voice of intolerance and bigotry and anger and hateful
sexual oppression.
What did Michael
prejudice,
Eric Dyson call you? A mean angry white man?
And a mean, angry white man. Yeah.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
You're not mean at all.
Yeah.
That's what's dumb about that statement. You're not mean at all.
I am white. That's a lie too. I'm kind of tan, and he was actually not black.
If you're tan,
he was
what
sort
the
of
fuck
brown.
am I? Because I'm darker than you.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. But neither of us are white.
Well, I'm Italian.
And
mostly.
he was brown, not black.
Well, isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's really weird.
The black and white thing is so strange because
like
the shades are so
tan and brown.
There's such a spectrum of shades of people. You're talking to someone who is like 100% African from the darkest place where they're not wearing any clothes all day, and they've developed all that melanin to protect themselves from the sun. You know, even the term black is weird. It's a and when you use it for people that are literally my color, it becomes very strange.
Yeah.
You know,
this is true.
It's like,
I hope that one day I could get paid as much to be so dumb. I hope as I lose my age and start aging and I start forgetting things and I'm start messing up facts and stuff, I hope I can get $150 million to be as inaccurate and ignorant as those two clowns right there. And Jordan Peterson, a New York Times bestselling author who has the intellectual integrity. I mean, I don't even know who to compare him to. Who do you compare a guy who seamlessly goes between presenting himself as an empiricist, and then he goes soft on, structural concepts or constructs aren't really a thing. What is black? What is blackness? I have time.
Well, and then this is exactly it. They're it's like, what is blackness? What is history? What is Listen, for the fact that Jordan Peterson's like, I'm darker. Your name is Peterson. You got a tan today? You think that you're being oppressed? You think that you're part of some systemic oppression that goes back to when enslaved people were taken from their homes to go work for white supremacists and beaten and killed? And come on, is this kid?
But this is the whole thing.
Yes,
this is the whole thing with them. It's like this is how Joe Rogan does what he does. He just slid into the national conversation, not only ignorance, but also a very insidious tool. But he does it with just the goofballiness of, I don't know. It's just weird. It's just weird. Dude, just pick up just go learn, go study, do something besides being a dumb jock who is spreading misinformation, getting people killed. I'll tell you the best interview I ever heard about COVID-19. This might sound contradictory, was at the beginning of the pandemic, shared by Chris Hayes. And it was an interview Joe Rogan did with an actual scientist, an epidemiologist who helped me prepare my entire community. I used that. And then I turn around and now Joe Rogan, he even promoted ivermectin. Is the money, he doesn't need the money though. That's the thing. He has $150 million. So he's not even doing it for the money.
I think I don't know what's in his psyche, just like I don't know what's in Kirsten Sinema's psyche. I don't know what it had. There's a point where narcissism goes off on its own path, but he clearly does pick people to come on his show with intent. He's not having socialists on now. A few months ago, it was about having Crystal and Sagar on, and they're so great. They're such great friends. Oh, that's interesting. You might be pulling a little bit of left audience there, and you're being political. But the majority of the folks, it's Jordan Peterson, it's Elon Musk, it's Alex Jones. I'm sorry, if Alex Jones is a regular on your show, what kind of human are you?
That's right.
Why is this happening? It's not just like these are people I have on because we want a diversity of opinions. It's not a fair debate. You're not debating them. You're Joe Rogan. If you have Jordan Peterson on with you or me, he's going to get a completely different conversation.
That's right. He's going to actually get a conversation, right? This is the thing. I'm not sure what happened to Jordan Peterson. At least when he first came out, he was able to pretend as though he was intellectual. Now he's just, he's out here like he's having a hard time with meth.
Well, he did go to that retreat or something, and he's been living off of meat for the last like 6 years. On that note, I do this dynamic, which is, I think, fascinating. I'm curious to hear your take on it. The dumb guy, the dumb jock. I'm just a guy. What do I know? I relate to you. I'm Italian. Like, what do you
This is weird.
I just take my I've been powerlifting. Oh my god, I put myself through torture one time when like Rogan was just starting to get attention, and folks wanted me to go on. This is 2016, and so I listened to a few of his interviews. I'm like, I can't. I was on a long car trip. I'm like, I can't listen to this. He's just talking about like different supplements and like what this is painful. So you got the supplement guy, and then you've got the pseudo intellectual. But if you have the supplement audience, they don't know what a real, economist or epidemiologist or
they think Jordan Peterson is smart.
I was in Arizona visiting my family, my mom's side of the family, and I was at a bar a couple of years ago. My cousin and I were sitting at a bar, and I went to University of Arizona, and this guy, he saw me, and he goes, remember. Sometimes this happens. It probably happens to you too. Sometimes when you get outside of your echo chamber and people recognize you, this guy actually knew me, but they'll recognize you. It takes me like 3 sentences. I realize they recognize me because they're trying to pick a fight with me. And I'm like, what is this? They'll see me from Fox News and I'll be like an airport. But this guy knew me and he knew what I did. And so, he's being really nice. And then he starts debating me and I'm like, I have no time for this. Like if I'm going to get this out of my system, I'm going on Fox News. It's not going to be with like the random guy.
That's right.
Then he goes, I don't know how we got to Jordan Peterson, but he goes to me. He has a master's degree, by the way. Jordan Peterson is the smartest man on the planet. Okay. This is a real human who has a master's degree. But it was such a wake-up call to me. I'm like, oh my God, what kind of work do we have to do to bring these people back in? And of course, this is somebody who's like a get-rich-quick guy too on top of that. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because that reminds me of Elon Musk, right? So many people think that he's smart. He's just got money. But I digress. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Elon Musk didn't invent anything. He didn't invent anything. Yeah. That's right. And Jordan Peterson, like his idea of living long as he was in a hospital bed for, almost on his deathbed, is eating meat. Just meat, the all meat diet. I mean, but this dynamic, though, I think, going back to the original point, dumb guy, pseudo intellectual. This is not a new dynamic. This is people like having, especially if they don't have, graduate degrees or really were never taught to do their own research or critically think. They love hearing a pseudo intellectual who can speak to them on their level, and that's their research.
Okay, wow. Okay, now I didn't see that one coming. I was listening, but you said they need a pseudo intellectual who could speak to them at their level. And is that not the entire paradigm of this bro right wing cancel culture, the whole cabal from Tucker Carlson down to Jimmy Dore? They're all the same. Exactly what you just described.
It's dangerous, though. It's dangerous. I don't know. Do we have that tweet of Daryl Hannah? Because I do want to show what the implications of this are. Daryl Hannah is married to she's married to Neil Young. For folks, Daryl Hannah is, of course, a famous actor, and she's progressive. I noticed this today that she was getting a lot of trolling. So she says, I'm currently enduring an onslaught of nasty personal attacks, character assassinations, supposed burns, and yes, even threats reported, because my husband decided to stand by his convictions, and no, he's not for censorship, but he can speak for himself. What a world. Sucks to be receiving such a steady stream of ugliness, but I have to remind myself, people who feel good about themselves don't have to discredit others to feel more powerful. So that's true. But you and I both know not all of these people are actual Twitter accounts. The right wing, and frankly, a lot of campaigns do this. It's not something political campaigns, organizational campaigns. They hire bots. They hire Ukraine based and other places now to go after folks. You know that when you tweet something out or you say something on your show, what kind of response do you get?
I mean, it depends on the nature of it, but there's definitely when the trolls are, when the bots are coming in, depending on what you're saying.
Vaccines, for instance.
Oh, then the bots are in. They're coming in. But if I talk about the vaccine, there's a flood. If I talk about Elon Musk, there's a flood. If I talk about specific topics, there's a flood of people all surrounding those topics. And you're right. Those operations have been so effective at generating a false sense of consent, or at generating a false sense of consent, or community. And they're so strategic at making people feel like there's a whole lot of people against them when it's just one factory croaking out trolls.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we saw that when the Force to Vote people wanted to have their real life rally at the Capitol, and no one showed up, or even this anti-vax rally where some of these gray zone folks spoke up, supposed progressives. But it's clear now, like, these are Koch brother funded folks who are weaponizing this. Do you feel when that happens to you that you are less likely to speak out online, like you have less interest, even smallest bit, exhausted?
Yeah, no, it definitely has that effect, right? I'm not going to pretend like I'm Superman here on Twitter, because even though I, like to pretend like I am, it is psychological. It's psychological warfare, right? It's psyops.
Mm-hmm.
They are trying to discourage people and make them feel like they are, one, alone on this issue, and two, have no allies, right? Alone in the sense, not only in terms of the people, but in terms of their philosophy. They want to make you feel like your philosophy is wrong and you're isolated in your thinking. And so they bring in a swarm, and then they also, they berate you, and you're looking around wondering, is there anybody going to support me? So, if that happens to people with 200,000-300,000 followers, I can't imagine what happens when just the average person who's trying to find out information or speak out their truth, and now they get 1,000 people who attack them because they said a specific keyword like vaccine.
Mm-hmm. And it shifts the algorithm too, because if you're getting more play on one side, you're going to be more in that community. I mean, I know that when folks started coming after me like a year and a half ago, and probably you see this too, my feed now it's a lot more of folks who are against this community, rather than when sometimes I look at the people that I follow, and it's like way more diverse than folks who are against force to vote. It's you know what I mean? I follow journalists, I follow leaders, I follow artists, and I never see them pop up. So it also kind of changes your perspective, even if you don't respond to them.
That's right. It makes you back off, and that's your strategy. Again, but what I found, and I guess this is dovetailing wonderfully in our conversation, one of the things that I would suggest that everyone does is to always have a community.
Yeah.
And always have a community that's diverse, which means we need allyship, which means we need solidarity, because that is our strength, because you never know where your backup is going to come from, right? You never know if somebody who's going to come to your support is coming from because they're in a union, or because they're a part of the LGBTQIA community, or whatever their intersection is. It is good to have cross intersectionality because we need each other. They are organized, they have money, and they have a strategy that is meant to divide and conquer.
And it's woven into the tech platforms that they're obviously have a lot of influence over.
Exactly. Which takes us right back to Joe Rogan.
Which takes us right back. Full circle. We did it. See that? That's called jujitsu. We did it.
That's it.
Ben, always a pleasure having you on.
Pleasure is mine.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
joining
much.
us for Solidarity Wednesday, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Take care.
Take care. All right, we'll be right back with Marcus of Left Flank Vets. It's a little bit of a tongue twister for me. Left Flank Vets. Left Flank Vets. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I don't know if you guys know, but things are heating up in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and it's getting a little dicey. And it's a complicated conversation, and I have no doubt that we're going to be shifting our focus a lot more towards what's happening in Ukraine and how that affects just the globe in so many different ways, geopolitics. And we're probably going to have a lot of conversations. Sometimes we're going to agree, sometimes we're not. Sometimes we'll be respectful, and sometimes we'll be in one conversation, agree on some things and the others, and then we'll change our minds, because I don't have any intelligence. I'm sure our guests don't even have that intelligence, even though we all have different experiences. And that is why I want to have a conversation about Ukraine with Marcus from Left Flank Vets. What's up, Marcus? Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. Been a big fan for a while, so it's very, very exciting for me.
I'm excited. David brought your name up. I was like, oh yeah, of course, because
Which shout out to David. I will praise the work of that man. He's busiest man in leftist media. I say
he's a machine. He's like, I don't want to give too much story, Dave, but he's got a lot on his plate right now. I'll just say that. And he's a machine. So agreed. Very, very, very grateful to have him. Marcus, okay, let's just start off a little bit about your story. Like, what's your background? What is it for folks who haven't seen your show? What you talk about?
So I'm on Left Flank Vets, which we stream on Twitch, and we have a YouTube channel that we neglect. But
That's how it goes. You gotta go with one or the other. It's like, it's too much. People understand. Exactly. You need like a full staff. Like,
I don't have a David, so things are pretty tough. But I'm impressed. I started out. And I guess I'll start when I was in the Marine Corps, 2010 to 2016. So getting out, and part of the thing that maybe I guess down this political track was paying attention to the primary. Bernie versus Hillary, and Syrian, what was it? The no-fly zones.
Right,
there was a question and a debate about no-fly zones. Hillary says, we got to do no-fly zones. I'm thinking in my head, like, that's going to be me, that's going to be like my job, is to like actually secure areas or have to do, some type of thing. And like, this doesn't make any sense. And then Bernie says, we shouldn't have war. We shouldn't be paying into the military industrial complex. And I was like, wow, this makes sense to me. And, started getting engaged a whole lot more. Eventually, did some advocacy work on local, state, and federal level regarding various initiatives between student loan debt, certain healthcare issues, homelessness, whatever I could get my hands into. Eventually ended up being a staffer in Congress for a bit. And they're considered progressive, like in one of the good ones, very adjacent to the squad. So I like the work I did there. I'm proud of it. I feel like I did good work. I feel like the people, my old colleagues and everything, they're good people, but very much steeped in the Democratic establishment and their understanding of policy across the board. And so that was very frustrating. That's and then during COVID is when I was kind of like, this is not for me. So I found a cohort of other veterans that were felt more ideologically the same, that we can have nice things in this country, and one of the things that's stopping that, and nice things in all countries, is U.S. imperialism. This devotion to the military and industrial complex. And I think what's happening in the Ukraine right now is almost, it's another example. Thank God there's not really been, I guess, too many lives lost recently in this, current dust up of this, decades long issue with, Ukraine. But I mean, when you see that even Ukrainian leaders and their officials are saying, hey, let's have some calm, let's try and, tamp things down, the US, UK, they're very much pressuring to get these weapons sent over to, the NATO countries. And it's, very much like a wag the dog scenario going on here.
I mean, is it well I want to get, let's go back to your background for a second. So you were in the Marine Corps. Where were you deployed?
So my first deployment was to Pacific Command, and I was on a unit that kind of just jumped around. So I did some operations in the Philippines, and then like a lot of like the training scenarios. And this is where a lot of people, when they talk about like U.S. military in the South China Sea, doing these trainings with whether it's Korea or whatever, like, and like at a point, like, that was me. And now looking back on it, it's like realizing like that's what this is. It's always, this constant flex. But then my second deployment was called a Marine Expeditionary Unit. It's a MU. It's basically they just pack us on a bunch of Navy boats, and we had patrolled like the Middle East Central Command, and did a plethora of operations. Some off the coast, like we did some operations in Iraq.
Wow.
Some supporting what was going on, like in Syria. We were kind of just like helping out. I think just chauffeuring people. Like there's, a whole lot of things that's like, as I dig back in like my timeline of deployments and trying to like pair it back with actually going on in the world. Not a great feeling. It was like you don't have that understanding when you're in the military.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, did you, when you were being deployed to different places and were asked to, whatever, we have to go to the Mideast or if you have to go somewhere else, did you understand what the grand strategy was, or were leaders telling you, okay, we're going here, this is the intent? Because you're also interacting sometimes with civilians, I assume.
Yeah.
So you have to have some sort of like, no, nothing.
Yes. No, there's very much, the things that the American public gets, our intelligence briefings are, akin to that, just a little more detailed. So when you've got publications, like the New York Times or Washington Post that are willing to buy into narratives, those are the same things, right? Except, for intelligence briefings, it's those same narratives, just with locations and names and a lethal plan to do something about it. And it is very strange. In some cases they do, there's examples of veterans that became extremely anti-war. Smedley Butler is one of them, who wrote a book like almost 100 years ago, so War is a Racket, and he spells out the military industrial complex before World War II and before the term was even coined by Eisenhower later on. They teach you about Smedley Butler, but just that he was the most decorated Marine ever. They allow us, they have to force us to find out on our own that, oh, hey, this guy stopped a coup from fascist capitalists, and then went on to lead the bonus army to get pay and labor rights for veterans, and eventually like more people in the public. So no, they don't give us any information that isn't helpful to the military industrial complex.
I'm glad that you brought up Butler, because what's been weighing on my mind a lot lately is like we're in this like predicament right now. So we have a Republican Party, obviously, that will find any war they'll create a war, they'll come up with it, whatever we know what would happen with Iraq. They'll come up with whatever scenario to start a war. And then you have a Democratic Party, I'd say for the most part, obviously there's some exceptions, who mostly are not, they'll intervene when needed, I'll say. And obviously there's a spectrum there. I don't want people coming after me. There's a spectrum, right? But on top of all that, like the world that we're living in right now, I think what's hard for me to grasp, just as somebody who's worked internationally on different issues and sees the disparity and the differences between global powers, like legit differences, like journalists don't disappear in our country. I think what's hard for me to grasp, and maybe you can help me with this, is yes, we are not the ones intervening in Ukraine. Russia, Putin in particular, I should say Putin, he is flexing his muscles. He is playing games with whatever agenda. They invested in getting, we talked about this earlier in the show, UK out of the EU. His game is to weaken the EU for many reasons that mostly has to come down to oil, right? It's always up about oil and gas. And the EU is concerned because if they don't have this gas pipeline, people could lose heat in the middle of the winter. and obviously many, many, many more ramifications. So in their minds, NATO is the defense. NATO's imperfect. We have no doubt. Like, I think we agree on that. I think what's complicated for me right now is I'm of the belief I don't think anybody really wants to go to war with Russia. Like, I think that's bad all around, right? Like, no one really, I don't think Biden wants to go to war with Russia. I don't think, I really do. I mean, I'm not like, yes, he's an enemy, but I don't think anyone wants to. He just pulled out of Afghanistan. And he was always that one voice that was like, come on, guys, why are we doing this? He's problematic, but I think what's hard for me right now is like, well, what do you do to prevent Putin from being the maniacal force that he is? Like, how do you push back and de-escalate?
Yeah. Which, that is the question. And I think like really the goal is to be for me always is for the like working class people in that area, they always need to be the focus. And also we should be asking, what do they want? And part of this too is like have an understanding that within that area of Ukraine, it's kind of like, like, I don't want to say both sides, but in a way you do have a pro-Russia narrative being pushed from Russia, and then you've got an anti-Russia narrative being pushed from NATO, Europe, and everything like that. And those forces have played a very dangerous role in conducting, or at least in allowing these things to boil up into civil war in like a few years ago and everything like that. So at the end of the day, I'd say, is there possibility that, for one, make sure that there's a ceasefire, that there's no weapons, and then that the people who live there can then voice their opinion over where and who they want to allow to control them, right? And this is kind of one issue with, like back when you're looking at Crimea, and why that's like kind of got glossed over is because there's a significant group of people that said we want to be a part of Russia.
Yeah.
And whoever's leading Russia aside, allowing a group of individuals the autonomy to decide, who and what they like their communities are shaped by, that I think is the more important thing. And there's just never been a problem that's actually been solved by U.S. military intervention. And so I think that's kind of where there's tough things.
Well, except for World War II.
Which, and that's yeah. Like,
I always throw that one in there.
Well,
like, oh yeah, right.
Yeah. Which, that's like what I'm talking about too is this type of like, we're just funneling weapons, we're just, like this type of thing, if there's stake in the game to say, hey, we understand who the bad guys are, there's an actual global coalition against the bad guys.
That's right.
That's an easy win. And if it came to that again, like, you believe me, I would support U.S. intervention, but I don't think that's where we're at. I think it's very dangerous too, because some actual forces within the Ukrainian military are neo-Nazis, and that. So like, this isn't as simple as like we just need to stop Putin. I think, especially on the left, progressives, leftists, we need to make sure that the voices of the Ukrainian people, that voice needs to be first and foremost. And like, as of right now, I think what they're asking for is the ability to decide, right? Like, so whether, I think it would be better for Biden and was it Ned Price and and the rest of them, so if they start calling for a citizens referendum, or at least let's start having just town halls and debates among the people to start actually dealing with these internal conflicts within their society. And really, that's kind of like my answer for any internal conflict with any society. It's just
go to the people. Well,
go to the people. Yeah.
But they also, I mean, and we do it too, right? It's not like unique. There's been rapid misinformation. Go back to Brexit, right? It wasn't a military move, but a lot of that was fed off of information that was funded by Putin interests and his allies, right? And they are doing it all over the world. It's something that world powers do. They, whether they officially do it by having like a, anti-communist publication, Chinese publication in the United States, like the Epoch Times, or, much more creatively moving money through, foundations and grants and wherever you can't like track it. So there is a chance, especially in the Ukraine, where they're more connected to the Russian identity. I was listening to someone today say that some Ukrainians are not as concerned because they were members of the Russian military and they understand the Russian mindset when it comes to military operations, which is fascinating to me because, I can't really remember in recent times a situation like that before where some of them are just like, it's not going to happen because we know how their game plan works.
Yeah. And that's like, I don't, that's something that like, as an American who has the understanding of like the greatest military that was ever known to man, for us, there's a little more, craziness to it, and especially as you go from Trump to, is assassinating Soleimani, there's like things can go a little haywire. So that's something I don't understand, but I do that. But those are some of the stories that I do take heed in saying, if the people there are not as afraid as, the people in the New York Times editorial room, we should be scratching our chin about that.
We should also always be scratching our chin when Thomas Friedman is giving us a military advice. I will just start with that.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, come on. What's the track record on this one? No, I mean, it's going to heat up. This is concerning, of course. We'll be watching every day, but, Marcus, thank you. I mean, I would love to have you back on because I have no doubt we're going to talk a little bit more about the Ukraine, but this was like a good primer for everybody. So where can people check you out? How can we find you?
So on Twitter, just Left Flank Vets, as recently followed by AOC.
Oh.
Yeah, big time. We made it. But also twitch.tv/Left Flank Vets. I usually start my stream dedicated to I call it Capitol Hill, and I just kind of zoom in on the U.S. government and what's going on, and but then we also we try and do some night shows with a little bit more variety type stuff, and we'll hit everything from Ukraine, Supreme Court, Joe Rogan, and all the foolish ghouls that are out there, and we'll laugh and joke and have a good time. So
love it. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. Let's have you back on very soon.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Marcus. Take care. And to everybody else, we will see you on Friday for Fem Friday. As always, stay in solidarity. And if you haven't already, go check out the Matriarch training. Go sign up or tell someone that's thinking about running. Working women, we're all inclusive. It's a great, great lineup. I'm excited to give you feedback on what happened. We'll see you on Friday. Stay in solidarity.
The No Miki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from a leech, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.